Hey guys, and welcome back to another Willis Unscripted episode. As always, I'm your host, Sarah Willis, and I'm hoping I've gotten a few lighting things fixed and figured out, but I have a confession to make. Sorry, Ben, I stole your hoodie. It's so comfortable. I don't know what it is about Ben's hoodies. They're just way more comfortable than mine. Maybe because I'm not supposed to have them. I don't know. Anyway, but so today I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit. I know I've been talking a lot about jujitsu and I've talked a lot about motivation, but I kind of wanted to pivot to talk about what I do for a living, which is teaching, and kind of go through some things that I'm noticing as a teacher, things that are kind of all hitting, I think all teachers at the same time. And it's kind of difficult teaching right now. If you haven't noticed or you don't have anyone in your family who's a teacher, it is kind of difficult. A part of it, it's just trying to get people to focus and stay engaged. And I've noticed just from the time I started teaching nearly a decade ago to now, there's a lot of differences, especially in attention span, especially in kind of the grit and kind of wanting to stick through something. And I've just noticed, over 9 years of teaching, there's some differences. And if you've taught longer than me, I know that there's a lot out there who have. You've probably noticed this too in a more dramatic way, right? From when you first started to now. And I know just there's a lot of different cultural dynamics changing. And, one question I've asked myself, I've talked to other teachers out there, is how do you teach in an age when students can look everywhere except where you are and where you want them to look? I mean, we could maybe get a little bit more dicey and spicy with it of how do you smuggle learning past distracted brains without turning your classroom into a circus, right? So many people might call it teaching after TikTok, or we might call it the attention war, or my personal favorite would be how to teach when the phone is God. Right. Whatever you want to call it, it's a very real problem. It's a attention problem. And I know for me, even sitting in a meeting or sitting in a church service or just sitting in a conversation, when the conversation gets past 30 minutes, I start to drift. And that's not to say that the conversation isn't engaging. That's not to say that the conversation isn't stimulating. Now, sometimes, of course, it isn't. And so my brain's just going to go off and start planning things and doing other stuff behind the scenes of them talking. But I'm noticing it myself, and I'm not even a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha, student. It's got to be very hard for them. I constantly wonder, what would I have done in their shoes if I was growing up as a student, when I was growing up, if I had access to just instant dopamine hits, instant gratification at the click of a snap of a finger or a click of a button. It's something that I don't think so many, I know, older folks will say like, it's just this generation. They have no work ethic. They just don't want us to do the hard stuff. Well, that might be somewhat true, but I think honestly, in our brains, we are wired to go after what gives us that dopamine hit, what gives us that high, so to speak. And when you are constantly being bombarded with stuff that gives you that kind of dopamine rush, it's hard not to pay attention to that. And so I think the better way to reframe this whole thing, it's not a generational conflict. Some people will do it that way, but I think it's better to frame it as kids aren't rejecting learning, they are rejecting boredom at the price of learning. Again, when you're having images just thrown at your face and you have these little 10-second, even not even that, just images and videos that get your attention, and it's kind of like playing the slot machine all the time. You're getting that rush every time you scroll on your phone. It's hard not to engage that. It is very addictive. But for most of human history, boredom was a price that we pay to be good at something, right? I talked all about that with the motivation and momentum, how boredom is that mastery kind of middle where you're building those skills and you're getting that repetition, but it is boring. It can be, but think about it. When something's boring, it's usually because you're having a lot of repetition. You're having a lot of stuff drilled into your memory. You're usually drilling a move. Maybe it's drilling handwriting, what you want to call it. Maybe you're going through the process of revision. Maybe you got to be quiet. Maybe you have to contemplate. Those aren't things that are going to be immediately giving you that dopamine hit. It's delayed gratification, right? It's when you start something, you have that boring middle where the growth actually happens, and then you have the mastery at the end. And that gets exciting again. But right now, boredom, with all the technology and all the access to entertainment, boredom almost feels like a personal, attack or violation. It feels like something's wrong, right? I know that boring doesn't really sell in the classroom, so to speak. But to remind teachers that are out there currently in the trenches with me, we're teaching a generation or generations, right? Because we got Alpha, we got Gen Z's kind of coming out. I don't know. I just don't understand middle schoolers anymore. I don't. They're not the same. They're not the same as when I first started. And it's because they're a different generation, I know. But, we're teaching generations that have infinite stimulation. They have zero friction for some things. They have an on-demand for novelty or new things constantly. They have a low discomfort tolerance. So if something is not comfortable, they don't have a really good threshold for that tolerance. They're constantly being bombarded with dopamine saturated reward loops. That's that constant, like, infinite scroll kind of slot machine stuff. Algorithms are out there on these social media apps, video apps, whatever they may be, that is going to reward them in half a second for continuing. And so I don't see it as necessarily, now there are some, right? Everyone's unique and no one is, the same as everyone else, but I don't think it's necessarily that they're lazy. Some can be, of course, but it's a biology plus a corporate architecture that's rewarding them for being engaged on a very addictive device or platform. We have to keep that in mind that, why certain things become addictive. It's because it's, tapping into our biology, tapping into those reward chemicals, the reward pathways. And we do have to keep that in mind as we're teaching. It's not just, oh, these kids are lazy. Well, some may be, but then others, it's hard to break away. I want to challenge you as the viewer. Oh, hello, Boudin. He's a great baby. So yes, he is a good baby. Anyway, so he's very concerned as well. He's demanding attention. So we have to keep in mind that you can't be, you want to be in the video? Say yes, mama. He's just a wee baby. Well, Boo would like to let everyone know. I can't even remember what I was saying. The challenge, there we go. Now I remember. The challenge that I would, give you, and I've done it for myself, is put the phone down. Are you starting to feel a little discomfort after a minute of not being on your phone? You may say, well, I'm not on social media. I do other things. I'm right there with you. I'm on social media for getting the podcast out there and doing some personal training stuff and doing the jujitsu stuff. It's a bit more of just letting people know I'm out there and trying to get some good things going. But most of the time when I look at my screen history, it's not social media, it's games, right? And so games are addictive because it's the reward pathway. So whatever it is that you're on your phone that you're using, it is tapping into that reward pathway, whatever it may be for you. And so, we tend to think of dopamine as pleasure. It's really not. I don't have time to really get into everything. I am not a neuroscientist, but dopamine is more about that anticipation and pursuit. It's kind of probably why I get so excited when there's a package coming in the mail. I know what it is, but I'm just anticipating it coming, right? It's that anticipation. But you can get, these micro spikes in dopamine from your phone just by, you're always trying to see something new, right? Maybe you're trying to get some feedback on something. Maybe you're getting a reward by maybe likes, reshares, retweets. I don't know if people, but there's some unpredictability, and there's even some social aspect that it's tapping into. And so in classrooms, as opposed to the phone that has all this novelty and this new stuff being thrown, Boudin, you're not in a classroom. But why? It's not time to eat. Oh, goodness. Well, classrooms don't demand your attention like Boudin does and your phone does. Classrooms are built around the opposite. It's all about that delayed gratification. It's all about incremental mastery. It's all about having deeper attention than just those little spikes. We're trying to sustain some thought. We're trying to do the revision process, especially as an English teacher, right? And so it's literally the opposite economic model of attention that phones and social media and all that taps into. And so you end up with this wall Go with me, it's a metaphor. You have this wall. It's a wall of maybe indifference, seeming indifference and distraction. And so indifference in this case with this wall, it isn't apathy, it's self-protection. So they don't want to deal with boredom. They don't want to deal with things that are uncomfortable. And so if school feels hard, maybe slow, unclear, maybe a low reward in the moment, the brain's going to make a calculated move. Avoid pain, go for a cheap victory or a cheap thrill. In phones and social media, that offers that because it's an easy reward. Boom, you're on your phone, you get the dopamine hit, you get some instant feedback. You're going to have very low discomfort if you don't like something. You can quickly disengage. And it's high novelty. Again, highly new stuff is getting thrown at them, and you can seek it in 2 seconds. And school offers the exact opposite, right? It's delayed reward, it's slow feedback, it's going to be highly discomforting or uncomfortable, because you are trying to learn things that are new and you don't master them immediately. And it's very low new. Like, it's not going to be constantly pushing new stuff that's going to be exciting. So this is clearly an uphill climb, and we're trying to climb over that wall in a way that's not so, I don't know, comical with how bad it is. Boredom, are you telling the peoples? Yes. So how do you sneak over this wall? Like, how do you break through? Well, there are a few things that actually work, but none of them are going to require you dancing or playing videos every 7 seconds or trying to outcompete TikTok on production value. You're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to out-entertain TikTok or Instagram, whatever the kids are on these days, the TikToks. But, maybe you can go off king or queen, but there are some things that we can actually do in our classrooms that have a bit of a greater success in pulling them in. One thing I've kind of been exploring a little bit on these cognitive open loops. Basically, humans, we as people, hate unresolved attention. That's why whenever I am looking at Reddit, I hate having a story that has no update. I think we're all there. Like, we hate cliffhangers. We hate it when the story doesn't have a good ending, right? We want the conclusion. And so curiosity is this kind of brain itch, right? We want to scratch it, and we can make open loops by, making a bold claim, maybe presenting a mystery, showing something strange, maybe telling a story without finishing it. I mean, curiosity in a way killed the cat, but also curiosity can get you over that wall of indifference and distraction. And one of my favorites as an English teacher is using narrative as the Trojan horse. If you go in this area, if you go teach the material first and then a story, you're going to get some resistance. But if you go story into meaning, you're going to get some engagement. Narrative sneaks past, the gatekeepers in the brain of like, ooh, this doesn't sound fun or exciting. Story can sometimes sneak past. And that's why, some of the greatest teachers, out there are going to be people who tell things in parables, right? People who tell a story to get the point across. I love it. I love how sometimes teaching and, my spiritual life, they kind of coincide, that Jesus did his best work in teaching the crowds in parables, right? There was that deeper meaning. It was an open loop where you had to actually, it goes into an open loop with dialogue, right? Because dialogue holds attention. It holds tension and attention. Because it's unfinished, because you have questions and tension and competing perspectives. You've got, it makes the brain lean forward and engage. Whereas a closed loop, it's going to give you something like the explanation, resolution, and instruction. There's really not a lot of mental curiosity being stimulated if it goes in that route. But if it's that open loop where you have those questions and that unresolved tension, it's great. You can engage the mind in having students come up with their own solutions in a way, or come up with their own answers to the problem. And it's also kind of social proof in a way. Let me explain. So people, we are still, yes, we're individuals, but we're also kind of herd, pack creatures as well. So humans learn by imitation, and stories are a really wonderful way that taps into that. And when I was doing research for my book, there was a whole section on that I explored. But if the room believes that nobody cares, or like this is boring, well, then caring is going to feel risky. But if the whole room buys in, well, then everyone's in, I'm going to participate too. And then it would seem like disengagement and being distracted is weird. And, you can shift the culture of your room, I really think, in a powerful way with a story. If you can draw people or draw your students in with a story, that makes all the difference in the world, right? And it's about making things in a way visible. A story makes a tension point visible, right? If you can get into character motivation, if you can get into themes and connecting it to your own life, that just brings people in, because people can see themselves as the characters. They can see themselves in this unresolved tension. They see themselves in the story. I mean, we are story creatures. I will go off and on all day about that, but we are built for a story. We are built to find stories, to find meaning, and anything we can do as teachers that allows that to flourish and thrive in our classroom, you're gonna get engagement. But, this is why English teachers or any humanities teacher, I think, has an edge. We have natural advantages because we usually have a narrative, whether it be real or fictitious. You can usually have open dialogue in your classroom. Metaphors galore you can have. There's always the element of trying to build empathy. There's always the idea of trying to find the meaning behind the surface. I mean, story is that cognitive leverage. It's maybe that catapult that gets you over the wall, so to speak. I mean, so it creates open loops without trying. You don't really have to do too much to show how story is able to capture someone in the class. If they aren't getting engaged, there's things you can do where I find the empathy and trying to do a real world connection. What would it feel like if that was you? Kind of making a student kind of sit in that tension of whatever's going on. It's really, really a lot of fun to do that, because every year when I say, for example, teach the Crucible, it's so fun. I love to, if you aren't teaching the Crucible and you're doing American literature, get involved. You need to be involved. It's a lot of fun. You can make it as dramatic as you want to. But if someone's not engaged in that, especially with the way that I teach it, something's up. Usually, because I can make it seem, okay, well, let's put this in modern day. What would be going on? Why is this crazy? What about that? What about this? And again, I know as an English teacher, I have a leg up on that because it's a story. I can make my kids get in character, so to speak. But science, can do this too, not to the same degree, but it does contain mystery, especially with science. Like, you can pose a question. Why do we sleep? What is consciousness? You can talk about rivalries. You can bring up these moments if you're teaching a subject on Einstein and Bohr. If you wanted to bring up tension between direct current and alternating current, you can get into that, the controversy that was around that. You can talk about maybe how science is all about the hypothesis. You have a theory and you've got to prove it. You want to bring something like drama into it somehow, because kids perk up. People perk up, right? A lot of textbooks, they remove the trauma and they leave in the vocabulary. And vocabulary is great, having the actual facts and figures and all that, that's great. But find a way to bring in that curiosity. Maybe pose a question, don't have an immediate answer. I really would need to lean on my science and math people to see what has worked for them. Because again, I'm going to be bringing in that English humanities perspective where it's all about the meaning. It's all about, the story. But maybe people out there who do teach the math and sciences, you can give us some tips in the comments of what we can do. And anything that works in the sciences, maybe it's going to work in my, English classroom as well. But there's things we can do as teachers. That's what I wanted to really, really point out. If you can sneak over the wall of indifference, sneak over that initial barrier of, it's hard, it's boring. A lot of kids, I think, today equate maybe learning with it not being fun, or equate learning with being boring. And I've had conversations with some good teacher friends of mine where kids will think, because it was fun, we didn't do anything. No, not necessarily. And I think if anything, that shows that you're teaching well. In this instance, a student not thinking, we did anything in class when, you can go through and obviously they were learning about character motivation and plot analysis and so on and so forth. Well, they did a whole lot of stuff, but they weren't bored. And so they're still soaking in that information. They got, this teacher got over the wall of boredom and indifference, and the student didn't understand what had happened by the end of it, right? I think that's really a really big thing. The more you can sneak over the wall and the more you can put in before they find out, so to speak, that, oh gosh, we actually learned something, the more you can do that, the more you're going to have engagement, the more you're going to be able to pull your kids and your classes along for the ride. I'm always big into having students take some kind of ownership of the material, especially when I'm teaching them. They're older. I recognize that. They're 11th, 12th grade, college. Some of them are my students. It's the final level of English to me is how do we apply that into how we observe the world and engage with the world? And in a way, how do we fight back against that attention-hungry social media out there? How do we encourage them to be in the long-form content? How do we encourage not only students, but just people in general? How do we encourage them to be a part of the conversations, open loop conversations? And I understand that I'm in a room by myself, talking in a way to myself, but you're listening. It's a little weird. Understanding just the power of story and the power of subtle, maybe, education of getting over that indifference hump, of making whatever the material is sit in the heart and in the mind of your student, of your kid, of your friends, of whoever you're trying to engage with, and letting that slow burn happen. That's a very powerful thing. And I think if you're a teacher who is really struggling, know that you're not alone. You are fighting a battle for attention, a battle for whose voice is going to be outshouted or whose voice is going to get the most eyeballs, so to speak. You're not alone. And I think those open loops that I was talking about earlier in the episode, I think open loops are maybe kind of how you get the brain to lean in forward. Those stories, those dialogues. Tech companies use them to addict because there's always unresolved tension. There's always something new coming up. I mean, Jesus used them to disciple. He drew in crowds with his parables. And teachers, we can use them to teach too. And I think story is the oldest teaching technology, we've had. And as long as there's a story to tell, teaching can still happen, I think. Just lean into whatever it is that you are passionately teaching about. Know that if you're passionate about something, your audience knows, and whether it's students, your family, or just coworkers, passion goes a long way. So all that to say, I hope that you enjoyed this lesson. I don't resolve the teaching crisis, but these are things that have just worked for me as an English teacher. And again, I mean, story works. Story's kind of sticky for your brain. It sticks around. So yes, if you have any comments or suggestions for other teachers, look, put them in the comments. I love it when people give feedback and give ideas on what could make maybe education a little better, and fight that false notion that teaching has to be boring or learning has to be boring. It doesn't have to be like, crazy TikTok. No, but it doesn't have to be absolutely a drag at the same time. So. But yes, I hope to see you next time, and I will, do another episode pretty soon. So, all right, guys, see ya.